I once had someone ask me 5 years ago, what makes me think that I'm any different than 999 other course creators? Or, in other words, what makes you think you're a cut above in talking about anything and then writing about it or doing coaching, who knows what? It certainly wouldn't be justifiable, I think, to say that it is simply because you feel it to be so, or that a few people told you you're great at this and that, or maybe you got tons of bills to pay, commitments especially, student loans, children, helping a loved one who's elderly. Maybe you have heavy medical bills. And so you say, well, it's got to happen or else. Or maybe you grew up believing that you're a cut above because of what you wear or what you own or who your relatives are. Did I mention already? Maybe you think you're cut above because of where you went to school, what titles you have academically, or how much money you have in the bank, or how handsome or gorgeous you look. That is, on the outside. Well, I think we have to admit also that if we think we're all pretty much the same, that isn't true. Some years ago, I started writing a book and never completed it, that the universe is very lumpy. We have areas in which all of a sudden there's a planet or there's a galaxy, and then there's nothing else in between but like dust or empty void almost. The universe is also lumpy as per even on planet Earth. There being rocks, there being trees, there being seaweed, there being fish, there being gnats, mosquitoes, ticks, there being cows, giraffes, and humans. Caveman versus modern day. And how can we say one deserves something and one doesn't? It just is. I mean, the universe doesn't even have to be here. There could have been nothing forever. So even that is lumpy. Nothing is deserving to be one way or another. It simply is. Including then aspects of human beings, including what makes you think you're different than 999 other course creators or whatnot. Well, first of all, you're a human being and not a tick or a gnat or a mosquito has to be mentioned. I mean, otherwise, how could a mosquito be a great course creator compared to a human being on average? It just is that some entities are human beings and some are mosquitoes, as per, what one can do and the other can't. And the same goes for human beings. Some would thus say some have gifts and some don't. Gifts would imply, though, someone was a gift giver. Well, that goes down a questionable avenue here, so I prefer not to use even the term gift, but what are you going to use other than gifts? As terminology, well, that's a good question. I would summarize what makes a person who they are of exemplary status or situation or whatever to be in three component parts. First, better ingredients. Secondly, far better tools. Let's just call them 10x tools or 1000x tools compared to what the average person has. And thirdly, as per what Simon Sinek says in at least one book or major concept, what is your why? As to how you're applying the tools and as per, the ingredients you have on hand also. Some might say the ingredients being grist for the mill, lots of different experiences, what have you. I think, first of all, better ingredients, different experiences. That is debatable amongst some people. Some might say, like some Buddhists maybe, all you have to do is sit in a cave for 20 years and cogitate, and everything is within you what you need to know. Others say, like Leo Gura, amongst others, read as much as possible, or, put yourself in as many situations as possible. I think, who was it that said that? David Goggins was a proponent, amongst others that come to mind to me, have as many different experiences as possible. Some might even say, if you were talking about women or guys, date as many people as possible before settling down more, if that would be your thing. In other words, don't pick the first person off the shelf or the first person you meet. Now again, though, there are the proponents of those individuals who would say, well, all you have to do basically is look within and you're going to know everything you need to know. But I would question that. Because a lot of what we see we are, or what the world is by comparison and contrast. If all you see is one flavor, how can you know what other flavors there would be and how they would compare to each other? Besides, to look within can be very much a can of worms if we have limiting beliefs or denials or, what do you call them, roadblocks or log jams or what have you. Oh, another word I like in this regard. The word would be blind spots. Too, only by meeting a lot of different types of people or traveling, and not just to the same old place transplanted here and there, would be what kind of different defense mechanisms are people using, and what handicaps, so to speak, do some have that are holding them back and others are not held back by? What constraints do some face that others don't face? And how do different people handle it differently? This is all then grist for the mill, so to speak, that you couldn't possibly dream up on your own. Okay, next, better tools. And I mean much better tools. Let's call them at least 10x tools or 1000x tools. Now, some again are going to say, well, it's so unfair. They get tools others don't get. I remember once my mom saying to me 5-10 years ago, oh, how unfair that Jim Rohn found this one individual, what was his name, Mr. Schoaf, and that Mr. Schoaf then took Jim Rohn under his wing, so to speak, for some 5 years and trained him assiduously. Oh, how unfair. Others might say, oh, how unfair that so-and-so got to go to a certain university and others did not. Others might just put it by way of saying, oh, how unfair that they were born with a silver spoon in their mouths, or that they never had any massive trauma in their lives, or that their neighborhood was always safe, or that they never moved around. All I would have to say at the outset is the word unfair has to go, or else you're going to have to say that the mosquito and the cow could say, oh, and how unfair that you're a human being and I have to be a mosquito or a cow. Now, I'd have to say I don't think we have a problem in general with our status as not being that 10,000-year living long person versus the mosquito or us, but rather feeling shame over what it is we are, what we are in general. I mean, it is what it is. So we may complain, oh, so-and-so got to go to Harvard, or they got to go to Stanford or MIT, or they found this top analyst and I didn't get to have them, or they had a Mr. Schoaf in their lives, or they had wonderful parents, very loving parents. Well, there's downsides to all of that too, and that's why, amongst other things, some people are quite unhappy if you're an autodidact, even if they got to go to Harvard University, and they might be saying, oh, how unfair. I went to Harvard and they got to be an autodidact. Some might even be saying, oh, how unfair. They got to be a cripple with two legs blown off or blind or who knows what. And they got to learn all these lessons by the school of hard knocks and hopefully come out the other end and not be bitter. So how unfair that I didn't go blind or who knows what else. You see how ludicrous this can also play out then. It's probably far more an issue of, oh, I feel ashamed that I couldn't have made it happen other than it is by the laws of the universe rather than it is what it is. But I think it is incontrovertible that certain tools are kingpin, and it's taken me a lifetime now, 64, to be clarifying these. First, I would say keen intellect is very important, but that the keen intellect must not come at the price of having what you would call a negative attitude. In other words, it must not come at the price of being a believer that you are better than others and others are kind of like mosquitoes and deserving contempt also. And that you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and so on and so forth, and that you're a self-made person. In other words, if the keen intellect came at the price of quote-unquote grandiosity or contempt, moreover, towards some people, that's a real mixed bag here. And we have a number of people talking of the problems of being very, very smart, so to speak. Schopenhauer in particular was saying how difficult it is for keenly intellected persons, but I think what's left out, except by Jordan Peterson, the one man I've seen say some comment about it in a video, I think he called them the hyper-intelligent people, but actually I would just call them people with far better intelligence tools than average, and there's a number of them, is that on the other hand there can be the issues of the quote-unquote attitude, just like we term those often coming out of prison as having an attitude, a chip on the shoulder. Only see, with the highly intellected persons from the brick and mortar schools particularly of training or schooling, we might have a different kind of a chip on the shoulder. Rather than bitterness, a sense of condescension sometimes, or more than sometimes. That might not be found in the autodidact, or far more rarely than sometimes in those coming out of the top schools. I mean, why else then do you see, for instance, Andrei Sakharov and his interest in human rights as having been, what was it, a physicist? Why else do you see a John Brahm, a top Buddhist in terms of compassion and intellect, as also a physicist once from Cambridge University studies? Why else do you see Pima as having gone to Berkeley? Most people don't know that probably. Why else would you have not heard then the phrase, perhaps if you've seen the movie The Pursuit of Happiness, the man saying if you want to make it big in the stock market area, that you have to be good with people and numbers. Well, you know, numbers being of the intellect sort in a certain way. Why did, for instance, Miles Monroe, the fabulous preacher in certain ways, say that he was advising all preachers to get an MBA? Why was it that Ralph Waldo Emerson, I believe, graduated with a divinity degree from Harvard? Why, too, did Henry David Thoreau graduate from Harvard? Why was it that Stephen Hawking graduated from Harvard? Now, alternatively, if you're the autodidact, that can be a rough road to hoe, even if you're at the top of the peak there. For instance, Ramanujan, and as per the movie Good Will Hunting, Matt Damon. But my question again is, this can be 10x of a problem if the attitude isn't one of complete humility, in other words, not putting other people down in any way, shape, or form, given that it's only understandable that a person from the outside would have a lot of blowback by way of certain reasons there. But I would state my belief that in general the intellect must be there in general, one way, shape, or another, whether you are the person from the top schools and have mitigated some of the negative aspects, or secondly, whether you are an autodidact. Again, autodidacts, sometimes examples being Ramon Yujan or Matt Damon from Good Will Hunting, or even in the religious spheres such as Jesus, or with the Seventh-day Adventists, Ellen White, who had a incident as a child when she was hit in the face by a child, and she never went back to school. And basically, she became an autodidact as per a number of factors later. And one of the most prolific, if not the most prolific, female writer of all time. Period, end of story on that. Now, what we also don't see sometimes is the factor of, oh, I was taken under the wing of somebody. Jim Rohn talking about Mr. Schoaf. Or maybe someone says, oh, I had a top analyst. There's a photographer, Liesel, by the way. I forget her last name. Liesel Steinem or something, I can't remember. Who was talking, oh, all the great analysts are dead now. Well, I don't believe analysts are all they're cracked up to be. But I would say a John Brahm, a favorite of mine as per the Buddhist circles, and I'm not a Buddhist per se, went with one of the top Buddhist leaders in the forest tradition, and that can be looked up. I can't remember the man's name off the top of my head, but he didn't just train with any one person or learn from any one person, and it was, by the way, for quite an extended period of time, about 10 years. So first there was, Cambridge University for John Brahm in physics, and then one of the top Buddhists in the forest tradition, and I would say the forest tradition itself has one of the top set of merits as per that instructional format. And we can all bellyache about it and say it's unfair until we look and say, well, what is the mosquito thinking about us or the cows thinking about us if they could? Yakking, oh, how unfair, they get to be a human being. Or the caveman, if they could speak, saying, oh, how unfair, they get to have a laptop and live 3 times as long as me. It's all, I think, a matter of shame as per what we don't have, who we are not, the whole 9 yards. And I remember this one wonderful movie with Audrey Hepburn in it. I'm trying to remember the exact name of the movie. It had Humphrey Bogart in it, amongst others. And I think he was a driver. And it was said, the chauffeur has to know, their place. And he was Audrey Hepburn's father in the movie. There's like a window between the driver and who I'm driving, and you each have to know your own place. Well, I think that means especially that you're not ashamed of who you are and who you are not, the whole 9 yards. Or as Les Brown, the motivational speaker, has said, that his mother once told him, or his adoptee mother, I think it was, moreover, hold your head high no matter what. In other words, no shame no matter what, or some might phrase it as never apologize, but I would say do state, something else, but the apology factor coming into mind being that you have a misconception then in your philosophy of how you are, who you are. Now, I think sometimes another type of 10x or 100x or 1000x tool that most don't get to have is an extended period of being unplugged from society. Often this might happen by way of some kind of physical maiming or genetic type of handicap, or maybe religious experience that or group experience religiously that separated you from the crowd. Or as per, I love the example of this, Tenzin Palmo, got to check out that show on her documentary, 12 Years in a Cave or something. Fascinating what she says she learned from being unplugged, basically, and why. I think I have better clarity myself and in terms of some of the mathematical studies I've had that she did not have, putting it in a better perspective sometimes. But still, we see that too as per solitude, the phrase being, as per what people have learned. Henry David Thoreau, 2 years, 2 months, 2 years, Walden Pond, although it wasn't exclusively separation totally. Every couple of years he would go to town, a few miles away maybe, meet with his mother and some other people, maybe get some supplies. I'd have to check my facts a little more, but wasn't it Jesus, too, who went 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness? Maybe Elijah, too, was away for quite a period of time. Was it a year or more in the wilderness? Let's just frame this as being unplugged. Unplugged from what? Unplugged from having to rush. Unplugged from being criticized for who you are, your ideas. Unplugged from the television, radio, internet, cell phone, so to speak. Of course, unless you bring it all with you, like some RVers do, including the whole 9 yards. Unplugged also as to what they call the ways of the world, the typical defense mechanisms used so often we don't even give them a second thought unless they're alcohol, meth, something like that, heroin. Unplugged even as per being concerned over, I goofed, I was a little 5 miles over the limit there, or I was walking too fast or too slow, so I guess I might face a fine. When you're unplugged, that's not going to be a factor. Also, when you're unplugged in general, there's so many fewer distractors, and it's a slower pace of life in general, and you're not working often to the extent you were otherwise, and your expenses are far lower, that perhaps we're just going to be saying to ourselves that your thoughts that are normally buried, that would be helpful to be unburying, both in terms of fear, anger, and great ideas in general, and aspects of childhood and more, what you think about society, people you met, that's all going to come percolating to the top more and more, as I would call it. Sometimes all the more, too, if you're walking, getting the juices flowing a little bit. And that might be in part, I believe, because that offers partial distraction, just like watching a movie, with no soundtrack, no nothing, no B-roll changing every 5 seconds or less. We couldn't handle the amount of reality, and perhaps walking in general offers us the optimal amount of distraction. Whereas otherwise, if we're just sitting on a lotus petal, so to speak, that's more than some people can handle. Again, isn't that why some Buddhists then unplug for periods of time, or as per Tenzin Palmo also, but I don't believe that's the total solution. If you get an idea, for instance, while you're unplugged, have you written it down? You know, do you have tools to be doing that? Etc., etc. Okay, I've also talked of, going to a great school or being an autodidact. My question too, did I bring it up, is how much mathematical studies have you had? So that you can crunch the complexities of life, but also so that you can see what's fluff and what's most important. Otherwise, you just can't get your head around kind of a hierarchy of information as to what's the major categories here to be looking at, instead of just saying, oh, everything is of an equal category. All 10 billion details, each of an equal category. No, mathematics gives you the ability to see these categories that are the major categories and all the other details being the micro entities underneath the major categories. Without mathematics, you can't really wrap your head around that whole concept of categorization of hierarchies, I believe. Next, amongst 10x tools or 100x tools, a religious experience or time of religious experience, whether very helpful or even traumatic, even cult-like, some might say, wherein there's massive misconceptions involved, I would say, denials, what have you. And you might say also certain excesses. What is the point then of a religious experience or time of religious experience? I think it gives you a different way of living life. As per Simon Sinek saying, what's your why? Is your why typically what they would call, quote, the ways of the world? In other words, is your why the pursuit of sexual pleasure? Is your why the pursuit of comfort physiologically, in terms of temperature? Is your why then the pursuit of fame? Is your why to live long as possible but not necessarily happily as possible? Is your why to have what they call status, in my estimation, to deem yourself better than other people, and to let them know it too, to be condescending of a sort, moreover? Is your why to displace aggression? Is your why to make a mark on the universe and let everyone know it, moreover, also? To have your name in lights forever. Kind of like Carnegie in a way. Oh, yes, all libraries must say Carnegie Institution or what have you. No, I'm just kind of joking here. I don't have all the facts on that. But is your why partly to make the world a better place and to have everyone know you made it a better place also? See, I think then a set of religious experiences, a period of religious experience, whether good or bad, shall we say, can both have a very positive impact upon a person, because your why is going to be different than the average person's why. I might call it the hedonistic whys versus some other sort of whys. Whether it's constructive or not, it's going to be different. I think then that is why we see so few psychoanalysts who had a different why than average. And a couple come to mind. Erich Fromm, who was Jewish, but he was a sincere Jew when he was younger, and later kind of went more of an atheistic Jew approach, if you were to use that word, or non-believer approach. I don't know what the phraseology is. But he used to sing or maybe even write up songs himself concerning Jewish hymns. Also, he deemed himself a communist. I don't think most people know that. Well, what in the world does that mean? But still, not your average bear there. How many analysts do you know who deem themselves a psychoanalyst and a communist? Although, what in the world does that really mean? Also, was it Rollo May? Yes, I think it was Rollo May. One of the only analysts who has a degree from a theological school. I think maybe an MDiv degree or something. That's not common. Now, there are others also who have dealt in psychological matters and with a religious perspective, too. I think Pfister, Pfister. There was also Paul Tillich, and I'm trying to think another name there buried in the back of my mind. Then there are others also who have tried to meld things together without an analytical degree or psychological degree, or too much thinking in that regard to the exclusion of something else. Francis Schaeffer, perhaps from Switzerland, and then the Transplant Institution here, or group rather, in America, whom I spent a week with when I was 21 years old. L'Abri, outside of Massachusetts, Boston area in Southborough. Dick Keyes, I think that's how you pronounce his name, and his wife Marty. I spent a week there when I was 21. He has an MDiv degree, I believe from Westminster, but he also practiced that for some years in London, I believe, England. And moreover, shall we say, of the intellect nature, has a degree, I think, in history from Harvard University. not the University of Antarctica. But although if you are an autodidact from Antarctica, that might be just as good as Ramanujan from a hut out in the middle of nowhere in India. Now, another 10x tool or 100x tool or 1000x tool is time. I remember seeing the other day Chris Do of the YouTube channel The Future, Futur. He was saying 10 rules for how he became a millionaire. Well, I would have to say, for instance, that the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill says there's different ways than just money to measure being a millionaire, so to speak, or rich. And Marie Forleo has said the same thing as per, know what your, what was the term she used? Know what your metric is. But time is very important. You must have all the tools, you must have great ingredients, your why must be in the proper direction, but you must also be doing the work. That's why you see so many people who are deemed very creative, very much prolific, to be quote-unquote workaholics, except with one factor, I would say. First of all, did they slight family responsibilities, family negative impact then otherwise? Maybe they were never married. Maybe they had no children. There are videos describing in other material too how all the greatest philosophers, or many of them, never married and had no children. More time on hand, but more problems too. Just like Ralph Waldo Emerson came out with one essay, Self-Reliance, very great. He said, if you want to be this and that, I guess you would say of top proportion, you must be a nonconformist. I would say one factor might be nonconforming as to, getting married and having children. He never said that per se, but isn't that why some people marry and have children, or more than some, to conform, lest you're a scapegoat? But it can be a very difficult row to hoe. I mean, there's many factors involved then in never getting married. Not to mention, amongst others, what are you going to do in old age? How are you going to feed yourself chicken noodle soup when you're sick and more, and get to the doctor, and many other issues, and avoid being bummed out from time to time, loneliness issues, and so on and so forth? And how are you going to be challenged when you need to be challenged and get feedback when you'd rather not hear the feedback? It can be all too easy to just isolate and never be challenged. Still, the work ethic is pushed very much for obvious reasons, but it's not the only thing, by far. Gary Vaynerchuk has thus been touting, the work ethic for years. Jim Rohn also. Some have referred to it simply as you must do the push-ups or you must do the jumping jacks. You can't just have all the other factors. Others have jokingly said, hard work never hurt any farmer. Now others might say, well, all work and no play makes for a dull jack, or whatever the phrase is. But if you talk to some people, they would say, alternatively, I don't work at all. I'm up 20 hours a day or 18 hours a day, but I enjoy every bit of it. I never work. Alternatively, work can be a distraction from getting to know yourself better, letting things percolate to the surface, the whole 9 yards. I see that all too often, along with, I'm on a mission to save the world from this and that problem. And, that can be an excuse to never get to know yourself better and see things as you need to see them, to include unplugging. I'm too busy saving the world to unplug and learn more about myself and reform my vocabulary, and many other things too. Can be the ultimate problem here too. Now, I would say too, there can be an additional factor of trauma involved that is necessary. Pain, great pain. Isn't that why, amongst other things, why Dostoevsky was such a great writer? He went through extreme pain, gulag, the whole 9 yards. Also comes to mind Solzhenitsyn, his time in the gulags. What was it, Russia? But that's only one factor. And it might not be the most necessary factor. We all have some pain or another, And besides, pain without seeing it in the proper viewpoint, I would say linguistically, will give you bitterness. Why else don't you see everybody coming out of prison getting a card printed the next day that they're a life coach based upon having attended 10 or 20 years in the School of Hard Knocks with 10 PhDs to their credit from the School of Hard Knocks of Sing Sing, which I don't believe now is still an entity. It's probably because their 10 PhDs from Sing Sing are accompanied with 10 PhDs in bitterness, and so they negate each other out. And so who wants to have a bitter person who's brilliant around? To recap then, these are the reasons I see, just, without fussing about it even more, as to why we see only occasionally at best great talent, and why we might say, well, it's so unfair that they had this and that. Well, it just is, as I've been talking about here. And we don't bellyache about why Ben Carson got to be Ben Carson and help certain people eminently with his brain cancer treatments, so to speak, surgically. We don't bellyache about Louis Pasteur, is it? Being able to help certain people with a vaccine, or the Salk vaccine also. We don't bellyache about Steve Jobs creating the iPhone and the iPad. We don't bellyache about what Jesus did for the world. And if you like cars, we don't bellyache about Ford being able to create cars. Probably what we do bellyache about is if someone is a great creator and we feel ashamed that we weren't, as if we could have been. Or secondly, if we bellyache because the great creator is also condescending at the same time, which is not that uncommon, I would probably say. But to recap, there's probably three main factors here involved in someone being a, quote, cut above of the proportion of what makes you think you're better than 999 out of the course creators or what have you. First, better ingredients as to different types of ingredients that complement each other. By travel, by amount of reading. Noting, by the way, I was fascinated to see that Elon Musk has been talking of how he was like a vacuum cleaner in what he used to read. Leo Gura also talking of this. Others through travel. Although travel doesn't necessarily bring you what books bring you, you need to maybe complement the two of them. Then the second part being better tools. I outline what those better tools might be, and I would say the 10x tools or the 1000x tools, some of which we would say, oh, how unfair they got these. Well, there's several factors of why we would even say that. And thirdly, the why of it all. And I'll close with an example I haven't brought up yet as to a why. I brought up the religious aspect in particular. We might also bring up then one final example, Albert Schweitzer. He had a medical degree and I believe 2 PhDs in other areas, music and maybe philosophy. I'd have to get the facts down a little bit better. But at any rate, friends of his and family told him, why do you want to go to Africa? You could make so much money moreover in Europe if you stayed put, and fame too. You're going to probably have none of that in Africa and more. And in fact, many don't know probably that for a period of time there, what was it, maybe half a year or a year, he became a prisoner of war there in Africa. That might not have happened in Europe also. And who knows what illnesses he probably picked up there too from time to time. I'd have to refresh my memory on that. So what was his why? Well, his why was to give back for what he had received from his parents. He felt he had it so much better as a child than the other children there. His father was a Lutheran minister, and not your average minister, perhaps, of the sort that there were both Protestants and Catholics going to the small church. So that's not so common right there. Now, there might have been other factors involved too, such as the joke, of course, oh, I want to get a better seat in heaven, or I don't want to burn in you know where, so that's my why also. I don't know all the factors involved, and some of them are humorous, some not quite so humorous, but still, there are factors involved as to the why of Albert Schweitzer, Dr. Albert Schweitzer, that were not conventional statistically for a man of that intellect. His intellect thus was applied to the why, not commonplace as per lots of money, fame, sex, shall we just say the gratuitous pleasures of human beings, or what some philosophers might have referred to as, what was the word? Hedonistic pleasures, or safety in old age, predictability, what have you. Name and lights, the whole 9 yards. Now, even if the factor were, as one friend had told me once, I donate so that I can get it paid back 10 times over in interest when I'm dead and buried and in heaven. I want to enrich my financial plan there by the interest rate is great. Well, whatever the why is, it's not conventional as per statistical odds would be for someone with great intellectual talents. And I just rest my case here that Albert Schweitzer is a perfect example, I think, of a why that was not conventional when he had brilliance of the sort that he did. And to Pema, the Buddhist lady of great acclaim, who went to Berkeley when many people would go to Berkeley to get degrees so that they can be in the tech world, maybe some other factors involved also. Or say, if you went to the University of Southern California and studied film, many might make films that would be action films, drama films, films that have aggression in them, films that have lots of sexuality in them, films that show off a lot of people making a lot of money and having a lot of accoutrements in life, whereas a few might turn to documentary filming. Not that common. Same for photography. Not that common to find people doing photography documentary-wise versus, say, in fashion or in the food industry or, something like that. People would say, well, there's no money in doing documentary filming or photography or, who would want to look at it and this and that. And there might be some truth to it unless you're on the top of the totem pole. And even then, but people don't look at the fact that maybe your overhead is 10,000 times less or something. And that's what John Brahm was once saying, the Buddhist man. People were saying, how can you give so much out for free? It must not be very good. And his response was, well, my overhead is so much less. I live in a cave. Well, I don't think that cave was gilded with hundreds of paintings of high-end prices, Van Goghs and this and that either. It might not have been the most ugly cave in the world. And maybe it was a cave with a few Blaupunkt radios in it. I don't know. But still, it was a cave. And at one point, he spent half a year in that cave, I believe he said in a video, talking about what he learned from doing that. Now, I don't know if he had TVs going, YouTube blaring out of it, and the whole 9 yards, but it was a cave as he described it, just as Tenzin Palma lived 10 or 12 years in a cave also. What is a cave, of course, is another question, but still, some would define an RV or a tent as a cave. Who knows what? Some might even describe a dilapidated house as a cave. So a cave is in the world, is in the eye of the beholder. And what's on the walls and what's playing inside, of course, it's more complex than saying it's a cave. But still, that's my final humor here and my final examples. All food for thought here. When we hear someone asking, well, what are your credentials? And they better be something that's going to perk my eyes up here. Just like Vanderchuk, one of his credentials is, well, I was raised in Russia and we were 12 to a room or something and this and that. Or a woman saying, well, I spent 7 years studying under the Dalai Lama in Tibet. So credentials can be unusual. So what are our credentials? But also what are our ingredients? You know, and I've been elucidating comments on this here, and I'll just give it a rest now. And you know, call it a wrap.